So we should probably go ahead and get started. It's almost 5 after. My name is Mel Homan, and I have taken on the Faculty Fellowship in Instructional Technology this semester and possibly a little bit through the summer. I've learned a lot about our accessibility initiative. I've learned a lot about my own practice, where I'm compliant, where I'm not compliant. And I wanted to share what I found out today with you. I was walking last week, and it occurred to me that something that just happened to me is very demonstrative of the concept that we're going to talk about today. I have a lot on my plate right now. A lot going on, and I was frantically trying to make a run to Goodwill in my little car. I had all kinds of stuff in the back seat of the car. Heard some clanking, some things rustling around in the back, and made the run, dropped everything off, got home, couldn't find my cell phone. So I thought about it. I tried to retrace my steps when my 16-year-old daughter comes in. She goes, "Mom, it says it's at the end of Ingleham Drive." I'm like, "Ann, there's no way it can be at the end of Ingleham Drive. It was in the car." She says, "Mom, that's where it says it is." So I went back and I looked, and I said, "Aiden, it's not there." I said, "Why would it be there anyway? All the windows were closed." And she looks at me and she goes, "Do you think maybe you put it on top of the car?" Which I did. I never found it. I went 3 days without a cell phone. 3 days. So what I learned in the process of losing my phone for 3 days was that, one, a landline is good. Having access to an alternative form of communication is good. I actually used my landline. I didn't know anybody's phone. You don't know anybody's phone number when you have a cell phone. You don't know any of that stuff. I had to manually go in and check my email, and it was tough. Going 3 days without a cell phone was really tough. So it occurred to me after this happened to me that, gosh, how much more difficult is it for someone who does not have that +1 communication outlet? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Another way to communicate with people and another way to access course content. It's exceedingly difficult. And our job as educators is to make that easier for people that need that extra outlet of communication. Okay? So things I learned: have a +1, don't get rid of your landline. Don't do it. And make sure that you have another way to communicate with people in case your little device goes astray. Oh, another thing I learned, just as a side note, I didn't know I had Asurion, which I do. If you don't have phone insurance, you should get it. It cost me $150 to replace a $600 phone. So, score. All right, so are you all on the app? Okay, do we have I didn't bring one. Do we have will this work? Is this a remote?
Yeah.
I haven't used it. Is it set up? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we get started, first we're going to talk about 504, 508, what that means now in higher ed, what it should mean, what it's going to mean. From your understanding right now, if you've got your app open, what do sections 504 and 508 of the American Disabilities Act mean for our teaching practice in higher ed? So if you don't have the app, use the note card, and I'll collect those note cards for data later. What do you think it means? What do you understand about these sections of the American Disabilities Act? I love Sparky. We have Sparky, we have Lynn. We get some really creative names. I see Sparky, I see Romperoo. So if you don't know, say you don't know. Say, I have no idea. This is all great data. Let me grab a tip, too. Some things I one that says equal access. We scroll down here. Got some good. Provide alternative means to access course content. Good. Don't know. State and Fed must have access for all. Good. Persons with disabilities should have equal access to all. Okay, so we've got, looks like we're maybe at 60%, and lots with questions. So if you have questions, it's good that you're here. Well, keep, if you can put something down, go ahead and do that, but I'm going to move on. See if I have everyone. And I'll collect those note cards. Okay, so here's some highlights from Section 504. If you look at your handout, it's hard to read. It basically states that no qualified individual with a disability in the United States shall be excluded from, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity that either receives federal financial assistance or is conducted by any executive agency or the United States Postal Service. We shan't forget them. Right? Okay. So bear that in mind. Just want to make sure we captured all that data. Okay. So in a nutshell, program accessibility, it applies to all types of programming, educational content implied. So I don't know if any of you have been involved in K-12 education, but there has been historically a big push in K-12, specifically with 504, in making structures and physical accessibility clear. So, I was in conversation with Lance the other day, and he said, yeah, there was a whole handbook on that. How wide your door frame had to be, how tall it had to be, how wide the bathroom stall had to be, the height of the sink, all of those kinds of things were made very clear. Okay? So, Section 504 has been transferred also into educational content. And it has been and continues to be enforced through private lawsuits. So if you looked at that copy that I gave you, I don't know if I added the additional verbiage there. It says you don't have to file with the federal government. You can sue if you feel like your content is not accessible. Your content or your services being provided aren't accessible. So that right, you don't have to file a complaint with a federal agency or receive a right to sue letter before going to court. So that's important to know. So 508. Anyone heard of 508? Specifically just 508. Wait, on your thing, what did you say it meant? What do you think it means?
Providing alternative means to access course content. So if it's your vision, differently vision enabled, then provide audio. If you have issues with hearing and you're showing video within closed captions.
So provide that plus one. Good. So it's specifically delineates what you need to do with technological access as well. It requires federal electronic and information technology to be accessible to people with disabilities, including employees and members of the public. So that extends to the whole culture of any public university. So a potential student who would like to apply to attend university here, a parent who wants to access the university newsletter and is hearing or vision impaired. All of those things have to be accessible. So the implications then are this system, our information technology system, is one that can be operated in a variety of ways and doesn't rely on a single sense or ability of the user. So remember in my cell phone analogy, I mentioned there has to be an alternative way to access that information or to communicate with your classmates and your instructor. So deaf requiring visual connection, Some examples were providing a transcript, closed captioning, et cetera, and then vision impaired, requiring audio, transcript, notes accessibility via that screen reader technology. Okay? So today, we will talk about the current accessibility policy, accessibility, technology, and teaching practice in higher ed, what this should look like in higher ed, and kind of where we are right now. And then strategies, if we have time, a few strategies for equitable pedagogical practice. How we make that translate into our everyday teaching practice. Does anyone have any questions so far? Did you read were you able to read it on the, it's hard to see. So honestly, when I first read it, I got tripped up a little bit. I was like, but wait, this looks like to federal agencies, but we are a federal agency because why? Why does this apply to us in higher ed? We receive federal funding. Okay. So I mentioned this as well. Again, after a conversation with Lance, the confusion began with federal stakeholders not providing clear-cut guidance on what 504, 508 looks like in higher ed. If you give us a set of directions and tell us exactly what to do, we'll do it. And that hasn't necessarily happened, but it is happening, and those revisions and guidelines are coming down the pipe. So, and that was, i.e. as determined with the physical access guidelines that we talked about earlier. So Tennessee's interpretation, so now where we are in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee began to address these accessibility requirements specifically to technology as well. In 2014, the Tennessee Higher Ed Commission created 20 recommendations for implementation. So the Tennessee Board of Regents, which was the oversight that we were under, has identified 9 areas of institutional focus, and then MTSU has narrowed that down even more. So the MTSU 2020 plan, this is where MTSU would like to be by 2020. More information, more accessible to more people. So if you look at that title, that slogan, what does it infer to you? What do you think? That we want to take a more proactive rather than reactive approach to making our facilities, our business communication, all of our educational content more accessible to more people. So MTSU will stress comprehensive accessibility from not only the educational content. So how many of you are you all faculty that are here? Not everyone. Some are from the information. Who's faculty here that teaches the course? Okay. From not only educational content, but also student life, administration, and services in every MTSU domain. Okay? Informational access is the primary focus in this plan. So at this point in the game, we're at 2.5 years in. Is that right? 2.5 years in. The university is looking at every domain on campus to see where we are compliant and where we're not. And we're trying to provide those resources to get there. Okay? So, obviously, big idea 1. If you have surmised information that is not available in more than one format in your classroom is not accessible. So if we are taking a proactive approach as a community of educators and learners and administration responsible for student life, this is where we need to be. We need to make our course content available in more than one format. So in some of your classes right now, how many of you teach lecture-based? I talked to a few of you, some have labs. So the lecture format, all right, we'll talk about that as well. So in K-12, this accountability system, specifically 504, has been in full force since the American Disabilities Act, was it 91? Why is that? I gave you the answer. Well, they receive federal funding, but what else? It's like not optional. You have to go to school. In higher ed, it is optional. So you'll see in a few of the slides later that there have been an escalation of a series of lawsuits over students who are paying for an education that they're not getting. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Actually, I looked up the state of Tennessee. You only have to go to school until you're 16. I didn't realize that. It's only 16. Okay. Number 2, so when students can't access important course information, they get a little annoyed. They get mad. So I looked up several complaints posed against universities. I just highlighted a few. A lot of these have to do with electronic access of course information. Specifically, this really surprised me. Harvard and MIT, in February 2015, a group of disabled students who were either vision or hearing impaired collectively sued these universities, and I believe they won. I didn't look at the tail end of that, but it was over course content not being accessible to screen readers, selected texts not being accessible. So if you have an electronic version of a text in your department and the software, the package, or the McGraw-Hill, whatever you've purchased is not accessible, that's an issue. If you've purchased it and students can't use it, that's a compliance issue. Okay? What was Arizona State? This one was over a course required. A professor had wanted them to use a Kindle for their course readings, which I thought was interesting. When you could do that. So, number 3, there are some simple technological adaptions that make course content accessible. It's not super hard. And because it's not super hard, it's really difficult to hide under the umbrella of, well, we've done what we can. We've made reasonable accommodations. Not so much. This is the 21st century. It's not hard to do. And most universities have access to these strategies. So waiting for a request for accessibility is kind of, as we saw on MTSU's 2020 plan, it's counterproductive. It's a lot of backpedaling. If you have a course ready, you love the course, it looks amazing, and you have one student in your class that can't access it, by law, you shouldn't be using it. Okay? So 21st century technological improvements in institutional access escalate that feeling and that sense of accountability, because some of these things, these easy things that we can do, are not difficult to do. And institutions have access to these technological improvements. So, Tennessee, under the original oversight of the Board of Regents, has begun to specifically decide and define what this proactive access looks like. Okay? So this is paring down to procurement. What are universities deciding to buy now and in the future? If it's not accessible, they're not purchasing it. So, look at your current course curriculum, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to retrofit everything, but you should be thinking about accessibility and making those big decisions, those decisions that affect the course curriculum. This refreshed compliance standards of 2017, remember I told you a few minutes ago that definition is coming to Section 508. This one says that Sections 508 and Section 225 standards will be up to date with technologies of today. So I guess those are browser requirements, what institutions should have, and it specifically is requiring some of the same things that the MTSU 5-year accessibility access plan is looking towards. So again, proactive rather than reactive accommodations, multiple ways to access course information, and moving from accessibility, this word, accessibility, making your class, being reactive, like, oh, there's an accessibility issue, I have to change this. But just, again, if you focus on multiple ways to access course content, you're not going to have an issue. Okay, questions so far? Can you answer this one? It says, how do students access course information in your courses and department as a whole? What would be your department's next step towards compliance in this? MTSU isn't asking for a complete overhaul by next Tuesday, but they definitely want to see us making strides in the right direction. So think about where you are as a department now, and what would be your next step in that progression. And if you don't have the app, would you mind writing it on a note card so I can collect those cards? You got it. Does anyone have any questions about what we've gone over so far? Yes, Dr. Boyd. A philosophical dilemma? Okay. I love those. They're my favorite.
Because, in our discipline, the educational research says active learning, right? It's not just information.
Right, because there's a tremendous lab context with those 3 sections that we talked about, right?
It's not even just in lab, even in lecture, right? Like how do you
hands-on.
learn the process of science, where you do all these active learning exercises.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just something, it's not just a list you dump onto a document, right?
Sure.
It's like, how do you figure out how to be a scientist? So, because everything you're going for is course content and information, but that's not all that a course is.
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's not. Sure. But could you, if we use the +1 mentality, and we'll get to that later on in the slides, if we use the +1 mentality, we are showing what we know in the classroom and then reiterating what we know.
But it's not just an information dump, right? It's leading the student.
But you do have to scaffold their learning. You do have to, scaffold what they know so that they can apply that knowledge in the classroom. There has to be some scaffolding of information. There has to be some direct instruction in terms of content. And it's that direct instruction that needs to be accessible so that they can show you what they know inside the classroom. So, if it's class notes, a video, something that starts the process that they will be continuing in the class, I think that would be appropriate and accessible. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
No, I think so too. I think the idea is we have to look at different ways. So if they are doing an active exercise, that is one way of getting that information across. And if we pair that with other ways to go along with it, sometimes it really, again, it's going to be a creative process to decide if those activities, just as you're deciding if the information, are those activities being able to be done in a accessible way?
Yeah, and I'd like to get to it, but I'd like to talk about universal design for learning, and I think that will probably address some of your questions. Do we have any answers? Reading, video, listening?
Can I ask something real quick?
Sure.
My wife is here. I work over in the Professional Technology Center. I have a background in accessibility, and she recently asked me a question because we've kind of gone back and forth in this. I have to make all of my content accessible, but what makes me accessible? I'm up in front of class talking. I don't have a caption bar underneath me. And I told her that the difference is that that's an accommodation that's granted in the classroom. Now, I understand that you're making a distinction between the electronic versus the
Sure.
But the concept that you're discussing and that you're showing in class, or the examples that you've given that they need to go out and research, is not something that can't be grasped. It's just that the information, the way that you're conveying that information to them, It's just in a different format. So, I mean, the concepts that you're showing them.
And how they access that content knowledge, because you have to be able to access the content to get to the next step of learning. Lance.
And I just want to add as well, to be back to what you said, I do think there's a misnomer out there that we're just completely moving an access model. Accommodation doesn't go away.
Right.
Accommodation is part of access. To Jimmy's point about, so we're not going to sign language interpreter every class. That's still going to be an accommodation for all.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. Accommodation's not going away, and making those individualized accommodations, be as your support model before, that's not going away. That will always be part of access. There's no such thing as 100% universal accessibility.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question. Do we have any other? Yes. I talked to Angela Tibbs. We had a nice discussion where I got roasted for liking 80s music.
No. You can like 80s music.
It's just not technically interesting.
It's a very small point.
It is. It's not significant. It's fine.
Actually, we'll debate that one.
All right. So what if I told you, and this is a great segue to this little piece, and it looks like we have time for it. What if I told you that there are so many strategies that we can use to address compliance issues, provide effective teaching, and promote everyone's learning in the classroom? Some great ways to do that. So, anyone heard of UDL? Heard of it? Know what it is? Really, that analogy that I gave you at the beginning of the workshop where I said that, I didn't have access, well, thankfully I did have access to a +1 way of communicating with people, and that was crawling back to my landline and trying to figure out everyone's phone number. This is that +1 mentality. Students can access, practice, demonstrate content in more ways than one. Okay, I want you to look at my little piece of clip art. I'm very happy with it. It says rest in peace. It was late. I thought it was funny. It is funny, right? So, wait, there's a pun coming. We're going to represent, include, and practice so we can all rest in peace. Rest in peace. No, it's not going to kill you, so that we can rest at night in peace. Follow the analogy. Oh my gosh. Okay, so in terms of representing, we offer multiple ways to access course content, and that was that content knowledge that we talked about. Include, how can you diversify the lesson format to boost student engagement? And then practice, how will your students show what they know? I'm finishing up a doctorate right now in education, and my favorite part of what we do is creating multiple ways to assess what students know. There's some really creative, really effective ways to do it, and that's super exciting to me. So don't forget my graveyard. Okay, so represent. Closed captioning, providing those closed captions whenever you have video is a fantastic way to keep students engaged, to provide extra assistance and an extra scaffold for English language learners, and then it's that +1 for hearing and vision impaired. And I want to call to mind a couple of research studies that I thought were really fascinating. So this first one, actually that's the second one, but let's talk about this first one. Robert Collins of San Francisco State University found that using closed captions aided in note-taking, comprehension, and overall achievement. So if you show a video in class, and then you have the capacity to also post it on your electronic resource on D2L, so your students can go back, look at the video, look at the captions. Oh, I missed that. Let me fill that in right there. Yeah, I didn't really understand that. Let me back up, read it again, watch it again, so that I understand. And that, that would be a great resource for like a, I don't know, photosynthesis. I just thought of that. I don't know that much about biology. That was good, right? I should. I just looked at you and I thought, photosynthesis.
We never heard that.
Right? I'll make it. If you insist. This is recent. Katie Linder at the University of Oregon. We watched several webinars together, some on the Access team. And this study, I went and I pulled the whole study, 70-page study, 15 campuses across the United States. So the end was great. It was a nice, diverse sample. She surveyed faculty and students, and this is what the students had to say. I've got a few of them here on the screen. Students said that 75% of students who used captions as a learning aid in face-to-face meetings and online said it was a fantastic help. Only 13% of these students who used these closed captions had a registered disability. And less than 12% of the same sample had actually registered with disability services and required that accommodation. So that shows great promise. And this was in 2015, I believe. I'm sorry, 2016. It was 2,124 students. Okay. So that when we say closed captioning too, that would also apply to providing class notes and a transcript in an electronic format with the appropriate this here. So represent class notes in format friendly to screen readers and impairment devices. We provide a template for this at the university. It's very easy to cut and paste your document. I did it. It took maybe 20 minutes to restructure what I needed to represent to make it accessible for a screen reader. And that can be downloaded at the instructional, our template. Where did I get that? It's with the IT website. There's one isn't there a link directly from the IT website too?
I'm not sure. I know that the
I
only
thought
way
that's
they're
where I got
actually
it.
able to implement that is going to be going into D2L.
D2L, yeah, and selecting the template.
And if anybody has any questions about that, feel free to ask me after.
And do we know about, does everyone use, assuming we all do, but maybe we don't, use Microsoft Word? Did you know that there's an accessibility checker in Microsoft Word? There's an accessibility checker in Microsoft Word. And it'll tell you what you need to change, if you have extra spacing, that kind of thing. So provide those course notes, communication details electronically in that same. So if you're not currently using an alternative means outside of the classroom for students to access course content, I would respectfully ask you to reconsider that. A way for kids to access what you do in class outside of the classroom. Yes?
So, I'm sitting here thinking,
Okay.
I teach literature, I read books, we talk about them, they take quizzes,
Mhm.
write essays.
Mm-hmm.
How do I make that accessible outside of the classroom?
So
I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, we have a discussion.
you read textbooks. So
We read novels.
you read novels.
Yeah.
How do they access the novels? Is it just a paperback that they buy at the...
Yeah, or they read them on Kindle, or they...
So the first thing that you would need to do is make sure that the text that you have is available in a PDF that a screen reader could use.
Okay.
So that'd be the first step. In-class discussions.
I mean, yeah.
So you do in-class discussions. Do they write papers? Do they...
Uh-huh.
So is it kind of like a...
It's a literature course. I mean,
It's literature, but the end product, the assessment product is what I guess is what I'm asking.
They have tests that can take different forms, typically essays.
An essay? Okay. So you're asking how to
Yeah, you're saying
to make
everything is
accessibility options for
outside.
in the classroom.
No, I'm sorry. I thought I just heard you say that everything we do in the classroom should be accessible to them outside.
Well, the content should be accessible. So the book, like the book that you're using to discuss, you need to make, the first thing you need to do is make sure that there is a PDF available of that book that can go through a screen reader.
Okay.
Yes.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
So with the discussions, we could provide like a diagram or worksheet for them to fill out while we do discuss these
But
things?
they're generating the discussion. I mean, this is experiential learning at its best.
Okay. Again, that classroom experience, if there is, that is accessible in the fact that the people are there. If there were indeed a student with a hearing impairment or whatever, that goes back to what Lance was saying in that there might likely
Right.
be an accommodation being done in that. So, being the fact that you have, verified that the books that you're requiring them to read are available in accessible format.
Okay.
Because you want to make sure.
Yeah, that's the big
that
thing, making sure the content is there, the content is available.
So that's the first step,
Okay.
is that you make sure you're not saying you have to read this and the student is sitting back there and saying, that, I can't do it. That was that.
It was a journalism student at Case Western that they had a text that he couldn't use.
Right. That was the whole genesis of
And he had to
that,
drop the
too,
class.
Because back in the day, yeah. So that's your first step. The second step is they're going on in class. That discussion is happening there, and you are accessible at that point. Because if there were somebody that needed accommodation at that point. But if there was any kind of summaries that were done of the discussion that was going on.
Like note-taking or summary that you provided, anything you provided to the students.
But I'm not saying you have to do that, but if you did, then you want to make sure that the electronic version that you're providing of that summary is done in a format that they can read. And then your assessment part, okay, let's say that they're doing that in an electronic format in D2L, then we make sure that you write the questions and everything like that, and that's accessible. So in essence, you probably are already pretty accessible, okay? But it's then that thought process of saying, okay, if I were to pick a new book, well, at this point, I also want to make sure, and as I probably never did before, I never really worried about whether it was an accessible book or not. Now I want to think about, is that book that I'm assigning that student to use?
Or can I get it somewhere else? Yeah.
Who am I talking about making it accessible?
Making it accessible, that's
Yeah.
going to be you. But Lance, I was going to ask you, can an instructor saying, okay, well, I am going to, I'll take that one. Can a teacher contact you and say, look, I'm looking to go to a new book, or is the book that I'm currently using, is there an accessible version? Do you have anybody in the office that would contact the publisher, or is that left to the faculty?
At this point, we left the faculty to work with the bookstore to find out if there's available. That's an initiative that CBR took on as well and passed along and working with the bookstores along those lines. So that is left to the faculty in that regard. But keep in mind, at the same time, we can convert any book into an accessible format.
That is possible.
But at the same time, that does put a student possibly, and this will not possibly depend on the timing, at a disadvantage because if it's a book that's not readily available, or we have to actually take the book from the student, cut the book, and convert it, which could take, it does take time.
And that's an accommodation, so they have to register the job.
Also, I'd like to mention, I think also to your point, outside of the class, I think it's obviously, like so many things, it's faculty discretion. I think what UDL, to this point, is if you were willing to take it on, and this has nothing to do with disability, this has to do with this, hey, it's good to have multiple plus one options, like Mel is doing right now. Would you be willing to have a swivel device in your class? And then post that later on, so that the students can get that sort of thing.
What happens when we don't think these things
That would be a way
All right.
to do that.
All right.
The students saying things I wouldn't even feel
Fair
comfortable
enough.
being
So it may not even be possible, is what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
but if it is, it's another nice learning tool to use.
Getting back to your book, if you look now, when you're looking at the listings of books, you can see at the top that it's available in EPUB format or whatever. So part of what you want to be thinking about as you're choosing, let's say you're getting ready to teach this course again next semester, and you usually pick these 4 novels or these 4 pieces of literature that you're going to be reading and discussing, you can look and see, or you can call the bookstore and say, is this available in an EPUB?
Yeah.
Or if you are picking new books for next semester and you're going through there and say, oh, this one would be perfect, but it's not, okay? Then you got to then make that decision. Is there another one that would be just as perfect? you know, and.
That's
and
also
choose-
accessible.
But if there's not, you guys can fix it.
If there's not, if there's absolutely not, if there are ways to make that accommodation, but.
It requires
are
some time.
limiting
Accommodation is not going away.
Right. So, but the idea is you're trying your best effort.
Moving
make
forward
it
to be
accessible
proactive.
On the front end.
Did you also have a question?
No, I was going to just mention, if the book's available as an audio book, would you be?
Audio?
Say, no, I don't think that's a great idea.
The students are not typically successful if they only use an audio book.
If they use one?
But a vision
Yeah.
impaired student is always going to listen to an audio book.
Yes.
It's got to be a navigable book.
Students who choose to do that typically being successful. Because
Yeah.
it's an issue, it's also, it's trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to point out, I know that there's a lot of talk here, like, oh, to make the content accessible, do this, and there's not any kind of direction on how to do that. If you are ever curious on how to make your content accessible, I can guarantee you first off,
But the resources are there.
It sounds. It really isn't. I can show you how to make any document that you have accessible within 5 to 10 minutes, at least 80 to 90% accessible right off the bat
Right.
in 5 to 10 minutes. Anything that has to do with pictures or anything like that, it does take longer because you as the content expert have to go in and write exactly what you want.
So that's what this is right here, labeling images with alt text description.
So if any of you ever want any training or if you're ever curious or have any questions about how to make your content accessible, feel free to contact us over at the Pitch. I'd be more than happy to take some time out and show you how to do it.
Yeah, there will be lots of instruction available on the represent feature. How do we add that +1 in the content of our course? How do we do that? Sure.
So for the accommodations to make it accessible, you can do it in any, it doesn't matter, language isn't an issue.
No.
What,
The
do you,
student has to be registered with disability services because it's
to get that accommodation? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So real quick, we've got about 10, 15 minutes. The next piece, no problem. Next piece is include some of the strategies that we talked about over here. Flip the classroom. Is anybody familiar with that pedagogy, that practice? So you provide them with that direct instruction in video, scaffolded note-taking at home so that when they come to class, they're prepared to do the activity, the design, the project, the problem-based learning that you've already created for them. So it does require that you make videos and post them on D2L. So these videos that we make can have, they've already got the closed captions that we need. Students can rewind, fast forward, take notes at their own pace, which makes your classroom time a lot more productive because they're ready to participate and engage. Diversified direct instruction, which is what we had over here, your round table providing guided notes. Collaborative partner learning activities, practice questioning, and encouraging that Socratic discussion, which it sounds like some of your book studies were a little bit more like that as well. And then practice. How will your students show you what they know? Big proponent of problem-based learning. I do it whenever I can. We finished a book study in the assessment learning and school improvement discipline that I'm in right now on the global achievement gap. Is anyone familiar with that text? By Wagner. Are you shaking your head yes or no? 7 survival skills that many educators are saying our students of the 21st century are deficient in today. Just to name a few: critical thinking and problem solving, creativity, entrepreneurship. Those skills that we can be fostering in the classroom are really demonstrated well in a problem-based learning activity. Integrating technology as an assessment feature, so you could do an online assessment tool, use videos, social media, things that they love anyway, because you can't get their phones out of their hands ever. Try as we might. So I use them in the classroom a lot. An oral examination, which I'm sure that you do in foreign language. Yes? An oral examination, portfolio or capstone project, that kind of thing. So, by federal law, higher ed is required to provide that equitable learning experience. We know that. We know that we need to improve our current means of delivering course content, and UDL just means, in a nutshell, it's make that content accessible in more ways than one. have that +1 mentality moving forward. And that many of these improvements boost achievement and student engagement across the board. So it's a win-win for all of us, right? Any other questions so far? So moving forward, while you're thinking about your questions, I have a interest form for you. It has been a couple of ideas have been kicked around moving forward in terms of accessibility and pedagogy workshops. One idea that's been kicked around is a UDL book study that would be implemented over the course of a school year, which would be the fall, obviously, because it's March. It's March the 1st. How did that happen? So if you're interested and you'd like to think about participating in a faculty learning community like that, it would be awesome if you would put your contact information on this form that I'm going to pass around. Any other questions? A universal design for learning, a book study, or any thoughts that you would like to see in terms of future workshops, bringing a lesson that you have and making it accessible. Do you have a laptop? Not everyone has a laptop.
No, it would have to be done.
You have to be done with Fitzy? Okay.
We've got a lab downstairs.
That's right, there is a lab downstairs.
That's where I do all of our boot camps.
Sign up for a boot camp.
I mean, like I was saying earlier, if you want just some one-on-one training, or if you want to wait for a workshop, or if you're just not really interested in it. But if you're curious about it, feel free to contact me, and we can set something up.
Is there like a click this to, because I've worked with you a little bit to do that. Is there something that is coming up that would be making classes accessible? Is there a workshop already planned coming up?
Not currently.
Not currently, but
that might be a real productive use of time to get going.
Would any of you be willing to bring a unit or a lesson and talk about how to make that specific lesson accessible? Lecture notes or?
It just seems like that would be.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
I think it's important to note, so we're fairly aware, in the 2020 are also positions. MTSU is hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have a director of ADA compliance for the entire campus. It's a brand new position, and that position solely responsibility to physical, digital, entire compliance for patrons, employees, and students. And then also Faculty Intellectual Technology Center is currently advertising the position. One of the misrepresented work for an accessibility specialist.
Right, it is an additional instructional support staff person that would work with us who would be able to focus specifically on accessibility. So that person, once we get that person hired, will be doing workshops, even more workshops than we're able to present right now, doing a lot more one-on-one consultations. Hopefully we'll be able to go out to departments and maybe do some departmental workshops for, small groups out in individual departments, and we can capture a few more people there. We'll be reviewing all of our online just-in-time training and resources that we have out there for you, so we can improve those resources as well. We're going to be developing that position as we get that person on board and trying to increase all of our resources that we have in classes, with accessibility issues.
The coordinating chaplain of MTSU
Yeah.
and the company. There's no timetable, unfortunately, on that position. That's one of the company positions, but we are going to that have been approved and hopefully be in place very soon. So MTSU, I guess in a sense, trying to help build the infrastructure and putting money where the mouth is.
Do I have any other note cards?
Are you getting data on people with motion impairments?
Motion impairments?
Motion impairments. For example, I've done some work in usability, especially in web usability, and we have this concept of targets. So when I move a mouse over something, that target has to be large enough so that it can be reached and not like vibrated off of. So someone with Parkinson's.
So you're talking about Parkinson's or someone with fine motor
dystrophy.
skills?
Right, right. So someone who doesn't have those fine motor skills, who can hit targets, and I don't know, is D2L at that level? Is it available for someone with emotion impairment?
No, see, there's software that can help with that. If you go in there with no software, it's going to be very difficult. It's subjective depending on how severe the disability is. There are magnifying programs out there that can make the screen large enough. It doesn't matter how much you move because it will stay on there. So it really depends on the severity of the disability and what kind of software they're using.
Someone with emotion impairment is going to use a joystick, typically to move around. So, for example, I don't know, like in and I haven't looked at it. In D2L's like menus, the set of menus that sit off to the side, are they tappable?
They are.
Right, so they could tap.
That does bring up though something that, one of the things that we'll be looking at in terms of this whole plan is procurement and what you buy. So the example you gave yesterday in our task force meeting, that if we purchase something that can only be done with a mouse, you have eliminated those people that, like you're talking specifically about. So one of the facets of the plan is for us to continue to work and think through how procurement will be part of this plan and how we will, help people learn that if you're going, just like if you're buying, you're having a book be something that we have to buy, what about some of the other equipment that we buy or we have the students buy, that we want to get eventually to a point that we make sure that only those things that we purchase are accessible. But, as we've been trying to say, that this is not something that can be accomplished,
Right. So
that's why I love our kind of motto. That was something that came from TBR. We can't claim that motto, but to say that our goal is more things, more accessible to more people. That if we are continuing to work toward that, we are making good efforts to get there.
And if you continue to bear that in mind in your own, like as you're getting ready for next year, be thinking about how do I add the +1 value in my content for next semester? How can I do that? And if you can, it doesn't mean you have to go retrofit everything you ever did, but moving forward.
What's your priority?
Yeah.
If there is a video, for example, that is the absolute epitome and it's the thing that gets your whole course across and everything, then that's a priority, and that may be something that we have to figure out a way to make it more accessible. But in most cases, we have so much variety of stuff that if we just chunk away a little bit at it, every time now you make a Word document, you should be making it inaccessible. And I'll be the first to admit I never did until I got into all this. Now, it's no different than bolding, highlighting something and bolding it. Now I highlight it and make it heading 1. I'm thinking that way. So, that's the progress that we want to be making, that as we make new things and as we buy new things and as we determine, this is a priority, I have to have this, this video is the only thing in the world that I can use, then that's a priority and we attack that.
For your course, providing those closed captions. Any other questions?
Are emails with students?
Emails with students. I was just thinking about that.
All training and student affairs. The emails that do perplex, that do hurt me, I'm not going to lie, and they're real pretty, are the emails that you often see where it looks like text, reads.
The big graphic.
It's an image with a real pretty image and the text. But remember, the text is also an image. Sometimes it's just that. That is not accessible.
That conversation we had about, you might think that, let me just scan this and then put it on D2L. A screen reader still can't. Can't access it.
An image by itself, whether it's got text on that or a pretty picture on it, is not accessible. But text, if you type in a text, say, hey Joe, I want you to come by my office, such and such and such, yeah, that's acceptable.
You can attach information.
A
Oh,
PDF.
have you not seen some of the ones that we have on campus about this open house
Events and
or
open
this
houses, like
event?
that.
It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
You can attach a PDF, so like if you had a flyer or something, if you made that flyer accessible as a PDF and then attach that to it as just an attachment and send it out, then that would be okay.
Yeah,
As far as having it inside the email, whenever you just open the email and it's a pretty picture, there's no way to add an alt description to that.
We are starting to make some inroads. Have you noticed a couple lately that come in?
I have.
Picture, but then underneath it, they
There's a
repeat all the
description.
information that is on the picture itself. That is an example of making something accessible.
The last one I think was the wedding dress.
And also a good example of universal design. You've now provided that in 2 ways. You've provided a pretty picture about
And
the
you've
open house,
described the
and
pretty
then you've
picture.
described that indeed there is an open house at 2 o'clock.
And if someone's email blocks pictures, they just go the information. That's another thing.
So you're not saying that when I'm communicating one-on-one with an individual student, that I need to make that so I know I'm dealing with someone who needs, right? This is the en masse sorts of things that we do to an entire class.
And that's the distinction.
You don't specifically, but definitely I'll let them know the example. I also can't help but point out how important this is for faculty. You can create an amazing class, multimedia explosion. You're going to write articles about this class and get it published in your favorite peer-reviewed journal, and it's going to be so exciting. And that very first day of class, here we go.
You have someone come in with a,
and someone gets hands on accommodation under this.
What do you do?
And I need a caption. And none of those videos are there. Guess what?
We have had faculty over in our center the week before classes started having to go back and retrofit everything. And, that's
you don't want to be in that place. No one wants to be in that place. No.
The thing that I want to stress is that this day and age, so many disabilities are not visible to the outside world. This day and age, there's a stigma, there always has been, but it seems like there's even more for me to admit that I have one, if I do have one that's not visible and everything. So again, this universal design, this accessibility is saying, let's from the get-go make it as much as possible for everybody. That way, if things really work the way that we wish they would, we wouldn't really need a whole lot of accommodations. The amount of accommodations would decrease.
Yeah, and there's
Learning, hopefully,
a component of the student population that will not. They need to register with Disability Student Services, and they don't.
and so
Because of
many
that
the
stigma.
things that we talk about as a mechanism for making things accessible, and in our mind we're thinking hearing impaired or visual impaired or whatever, just because that's again kind of our history and those of us that have been around for a while think that. But almost every single one of these techniques that we talk about not only would help that person with a visual impairment, are going to help the everyday student that's also in there. That if I am a student and I can read something, and I can listen to something, and I can touch something, I got 3 shots at learning that. I've got 3 abilities to be able
3
to
different
get that
ways.
information. So you are in implementing some of these accessibility things and then universal design concept, you are increasing an individual's chance to
get it and succeed in your class, which is what we all want, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's all those with our retention and student success and all of that kind of stuff. You had another question?
Well, yeah, it's just, in terms of teaching a foreign language, there's times when we want to isolate those different skills. And so then my question becomes, are we no longer compliant when we're isolating skills? So there are times when we just want students to listen, there are times when we just want them to read, there are times when we just want, and we're focusing on
Compliance
those.
law that is accessible. Yeah, talking about basic compliance law.
Right, so for example, if we're showing a video because we want them to have those in comprehension, we also don't want it captioned at that time. If we then show it captioned later, is that compliant, or is the fact that we didn't show it captioned?
Provided captioned
Because we don't want them
outside
to
of the
read it, we
classroom.
want them to listen.
Right, I see what you're saying.
So
That's an excellent
how does
question.
someone who is deaf take the class?
Well, I don't know. because I don't know how to instruct deaf students in foreign language. It's not part of my PhD training. And I'm not being sarcastic or trying to be funny.
No, if the fundamental principle of that exercise is that they listen, then you would not have that caption. That is correct. But for that student who is deaf, who did sign up with the naturally accommodation fees comes in, we would have to work with you and that student to determine what's an equitable alternative assignment.
Well, the same goes for vision impaired. If the second part of the assignment is to show captions, and the person who's visually impaired can't see the captions,
Right.
It's the same issue.
In that case, the audio.
There's the audio. Make the audio available.
You still go back to the learning outcomes that you are trying to reach. Always think of that as where you're starting. Okay. Then, again, if we need to think about how a student who is, hearing impaired, how are they going to meet that learning outcome? And, in some cases it may be an accommodation. In some cases, it may be something that you can build into the course itself. So it really goes back to kind of that instructional design of what you're trying to accomplish. And the more accessible you can make it, the better, but not in jeopardy of the learning outcomes.
Yeah, you're not going to.
I mean, that's still the bottom line.
Well, that's like having
we talked about this too.
Hearing impaired student in a music class, which seems sort of counterintuitive. So that person couldn't hear the Mozart symphony, but you just do the best you can. There are certain limitations on the course.
Or the degree of the impairment. So if they can hear the tones, and they might still enjoy the course.
The room has had a person with hearing impairment in their audio engineering.
She did very well, and we closed captioned things and we did the best we could, but there's a certain sort of, you can only go so far.
And that's what we're saying.
Right.
Never in any of our lifetimes, and anybody coming after us, are we going to be able to say everything is 100% 100% accessible for 100% of the people 100% of the time. Right, we can't say that. We never will get to that point. But we have to try, try that. But even more so, I think we have to be really open to trying everything. And I think that's another thing that we want to accomplish with with all of this stuff, is that rather than saying, no, can't be done, walk away,
make an effort.
Oh boy, how in the heck am I going to do this? And how am I going to still meet the learning outcomes that I want to reach? But Joe has just as much right to be here as Fred does, so I've got to try my best. So there's part of it is a mentality shift to say it's as much my responsibility as the faculty member as it is the student's responsibility, because they are the ones that they're, and our support services that we have, to help us get to that.
To be honest, legally, we can't just say no. We've got to at least engage in what's called an interactive process. And if the end result of the interactive process is still no, that's fine. But we have to engage in the interactive process.
How?
Students that get through med school that you would have never thought had to work out to get through med school. Nowadays they can, and that's one of the really cool things as a technologist that technology is letting us be able to do, but it's also causing a lot more questions and a lot more things to say, oh, is there a way to do this?
Well, thank you all for being here today. Did anyone have that sign-up sheet? There's no signatures on it. Y'all, come on.
I'll sign up for it. I don't think it's going to help you much.
Do what?
I said I'll sign up for it, but I'm not faculty.
You're not faculty.
I'm more than happy to help.
Maybe not everybody at the same time. Can I get somebody else?
Have a great afternoon. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Mel.